Amara Jones boarded Flight 828, just like every other passenger that morning, with no expectation that the day would become anything but routine. She had her hoodie pulled over her curly hair, earbuds already in, and her favorite novel tucked under one arm. Her boarding pass buzzed on the scanner, and she gave a polite smile to the flight attendant as she stepped onto the plane. The aircraft smelled like coffee and recycled air. People were settling in, stowing bags, juggling neck, pillows, and snack packs. Amara didn't look extraordinary, but that would change before they even crossed Mississippi. She found her seat, 14A, window, perfect for her usual in-flight ritual: music, sky views, and disappearing into pages of fiction. She had just wrapped up a leadership conference in Dallas, a scholarship-sponsored event for top STEM students from historically black colleges. Amara was a senior majoring in aerospace engineering at Spelman. She loved planes, loved the sky. Her dream? To work in mission control at NASA, or maybe even pilot research aircraft one day. But today, she was just a passenger. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Good morning, folks. This is your captain speaking. We're expecting a smooth ride today. Should have you into Atlanta just before 1:30 p.m. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." She smiled to herself. Something about a confident pilot's voice always reassured her. Everything about flying fascinated Amara. She studied aircraft systems the way others studied celebrities. She knew every button in a cockpit and had logged dozens of hours in flight simulators back at school. They took off without issue. The wheels lifted, and the aircraft soared into a bright morning sky. As they climbed to cruising altitude, Amara glanced outside. White clouds stretched across the sky like rolling fields. She flipped open her novel, tapped play on her music, and settled in. People around her chatted, snoozed, and watched movies. It felt like every other flight she'd been on. But 43 minutes into the air, the plane jolted. Not a little bump, not your average turbulence. A deep, gut-dropping lurch that made overhead compartments rattle and seatbelts snap tight against bodies. A baby wailed behind her. Coffee splashed across a businessman's lap. Amara's book slipped from her hands. Then came the bang. A deep, hollow explosion rocked the right side of the aircraft. The lights flickered. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked furiously. Flight attendants rushed down the aisles, trying to calm passengers now gripped in panic. A few people screamed. The plane tilted unnaturally left. Amara's stomach dropped again. This wasn't regular turbulence. Something was deeply wrong. She pulled off her headphones. All around her, panic rippled through the cabin. The intercom crackled again, but this time, no voice, just static. Then the oxygen masks dropped. The moment froze in Amara's mind. Those dangling masks, the gasps, the muffled cries. Her heart pounded. She'd trained for emergencies in simulation, watched hundreds of case studies of failed flights, mid-air engine loss, decompression, and even full cockpit incapacitations, but she had never lived one. A flight attendant stumbled past her row, grabbing a seat for balance. Amara reached out, steadying her. "What's happening?" she asked, voice tight. The attendant looked pale. We're trying to contact the cockpit. We're not getting any response. Please stay seated and mask on." Amara's engineering brain began racing, putting together what she was seeing and hearing. The lurch, the silence, the tilt. And now no pilot response. She glanced out the window. The horizon looked wrong. Too close. The plane was descending fast. A passenger near the back screamed, "Are we crashing?" Amara tore the mask from her face. She couldn't just sit here. Something in her told her to move. Instinct, purpose, whatever it was, it made her unbuckle and stand. You can't be up. A flight attendant said. I need to get to the cockpit, Amara said, eyes sharp. What? I'm a flight sim-trained aerospace student. I know planes. If they're not responding, someone has to take control. The attendant hesitated. Rules said no passengers could enter the cockpit, but chaos had taken over. She looked back toward the front, then nodded. Come with me, quickly. They pushed forward against gravity and fear. People stared at her. As she moved past rows of wide eyes and gripping hands. What's she doing? Someone muttered. She can't go in there, she's just a kid. But Amara kept moving. They reached the cockpit. The attendant keyed in the override code no response. She knocked, shouted, nothing. She keyed in again. This time, the door buzzed open. Amara's breath caught as she stepped inside. The co-pilot was slumped forward, oxygen mask hanging loose. The captain was still motionless, head tilted unnaturally against the window. Red lights blinked across the dash. Warning tones sounded in overlapping chaos. The plane was in a steep descent. Neither pilot moved. Amara didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She slid into the left seat, gripping the control yoke. She didn't think about the news, or the fear, or the fact she wasn't licensed. She just thought, fly the plane. The cockpit smelled like electrical heat and metal. Warning alarms echoed in a relentless chorus and orchestra of danger. Red and amber lights blinked across the control panel. The autopilot was disengaged, altitude rapidly decreasing. Airspeed rising. Amara's hands hovered over the yoke. Her breath caught in her throat. Two unconscious pilots beside her, a plummeting jet, and over 160 lives behind her, screaming and praying. Okay, she whispered to herself. This is just a bigger plane, just a bigger simulator. She sat in the left seat, the captain's seat. Her fingers reached for the controls as the flight attendant behind her stood frozen. Can you do this? The attendant asked, voice trembling. Amara didn't look back. I don't know, but I have to try. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Her heart pounded, but her mind flipped into focus. Altitude still dropping. 23,000 feet? 22,000. They were losing altitude too quickly. Something was pulling them down. Either a pressure failure or partial engine loss, or both. Where's the headset? She asked. The flight attendant pointed. Amara slipped it on, adjusted the mic, and flicked the switch for comms. She remembered this interface from her training program back in Atlanta. Slightly different layout, but fundamentally the same. Mayday. Mayday. This is Delta Flight 828. Pilots are unresponsive. I repeat, pilots are unconscious. A passenger is attempting to stabilize the aircraft. Over. Dead silence. Then, static. Then, Flight 828. This is Atlanta Center. Say again, did you say a passenger is flying the aircraft? Yes, my name is Amara Jones. I'm a student with flight simulation and light aircraft experience. I've taken the controls. The plane is descending. I need instructions right now. The controller's voice changed, professional, alert, but barely concealing disbelief. Understood, Amara. Can you confirm aircraft altitude and heading? She scanned quickly. We're at 21,200 feet, heading east-northeast. Engines responding, but controls sluggish. Behind her, the flight attendant gasped softly. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. This girl, this student, had just assumed command of a Boeing 737 like it was routine. Okay, Amara, you're doing good, said Atlanta Center. Let's start by leveling the wings. Gently pull back and bring nose up 5 degrees. Confirm. Vertical speed. Amara adjusted the yoke carefully. Her hands were sweaty, but steady. The plane shuddered as she made the correction. For a moment, it fought her, resisting like a wild animal, but then the vertical speed indicator began to level out. We're stabilizing. Vertical speed now at minus 700 feet per minute. Still descending, but slowing. That's good. You're regaining control. Keep your current heading. Help is en route. Help? What kind of help? Amara didn't ask. She was too focused on the task in front of her. Behind her, the flight crew was already relaying updates to passengers. Word was spreading. Someone was flying the plane. Someone young and black and female. Disbelief rippled down the aisles. Wait, a girl's flying us? Who is she? Is this a joke? But it wasn't. Amara Jones, age 22, was keeping a crippled aircraft from falling out of the sky. Atlanta Center came back. Amara, can you locate the autopilot and attempt to re-engage it? I see it. Trying now. She flipped the switch. Nothing. No response. Autopilot appears offline. Copy that. Continue manual control. What's your fuel status? She glanced. Left tank near full. Right tank dropping faster. Fuel imbalance. Likely engine issue. Roger. We'll vector you toward Montgomery Regional. Longest runway, calm winds. Can you navigate there? I'll try. A second voice joined the radio and experienced FAA controller. Amara, this is Captain Ben Rhodes. I'll guide you step by step. You're not alone, okay? His voice was steady, reassuring. She needed that. Thanks, Captain. I'm ready. And so began the flight Amara would never forget. Rhodes talked her through everything: trim, throttle control, adjusting pitch and heading. She asked smart questions, gave clear updates. Her training was paying off. But even as she steadied the aircraft, doubt lurked beneath her focus. What if she failed? What if she miscalculated? What if she couldn't land? But each time fear crept in, she reminded herself of the passengers behind her. Mothers, children, elderly, businessmen, students, people with lives and dreams. They didn't know her name yet, but they were all counting on her. Time passed in surreal minutes. The aircraft began a slow turn southeast toward Montgomery. The controller reported. Clear skies ahead, but a storm system was building behind them. They had a narrow window. If they missed it, weather would make landing almost impossible. How's your airspeed? Rhodes asked. Holding at 270 knots. I'm trimming down. Good. Start descending toward 10,000 feet. You'll begin approach in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. She took a breath. 10 minutes to align a jetliner, descend, and prepare for a manual landing she had never performed outside a simulator. Piece by piece, she built her plan. Fuel transfer, skip it. Too risky now. Flaps deployment, she'd need those during final. Descent. Landing gear, wait for clearance. She was mapping everything mentally, just as she'd practiced hundreds of times before. But never like this. Never with people's lives on the line. Amara, came the voice of Captain Rhodes again. I've flown for 32 years. I've seen pilots panic under less. You're doing something truly remarkable. She didn't respond right away. Finally, she said, I don't want to be remarkable. I just want to get them home. The frequency fell silent for a second. Then, that's exactly why you're the right person for this. And with that, Amara banked gently toward the runway lights beginning to appear on the horizon. Amara's knuckles whitened on the yoke as she guided the plane through thin, streaky clouds. The early afternoon sun was fading fast behind her, swallowed by the approaching storm system. Wind gusts slapped the fuselage with random jolts. The aircraft trembled, but stayed in her control. She kept breathing slow and steady, even as adrenaline made her whole body feel like it was vibrating. Every move mattered now. Every correction had to be precise. Flight 828. You are clear to descend to 9,000 feet and continue heading 270, came the calm voice of Captain Rhodes from Atlanta Center. Copy that, Amara responded, adjusting her heading. Behind her, the cabin wasn't quiet far from it. Babies cried, passengers whispered prayers, and murmurs grew louder. The flight attendants were trying to keep order, but tension blanketed the entire plane. Some passengers still didn't believe what they were hearing. A girl? A passenger? Flying the plane? But First Officer Miguel Soto and Captain Alan Reeves were still unconscious. Emergency medics on the ground were preparing for possible resuscitation. But Amara had no time to wonder about their fates. Her focus was the aircraft and the people depending on her. She tapped into her training, balance pitch, power, and patience. Fuel levels showed a noticeable drop in the right engine, which meant asymmetric thrust was pulling the aircraft subtly to one side. She compensated by adjusting rudder trim manually. It wasn't easy. This aircraft wasn't a Cessna. It was a twin-engine commercial jet carrying more than 160 souls. One mistake could send them into a spin, yet she stayed calm. Atlanta Center kept feeding her updates. Wind speed, runway alignment, altitude markers. With every mile they drew closer to Montgomery, Amara's grip on reality tightened, and yet, it also blurred. She felt like she was outside herself, watching someone else do the impossible. But she also knew it was really her. Every correction, every calculation, every second that kept them alive was hers. She heard a rustle behind her. One of the flight attendants, Amara. Passengers are asking questions. Should we tell them who's flying? Amara hesitated. She hadn't even thought about that yet. She didn't want attention. She didn't want fame. But she knew people were scared, and maybe hearing the truth from her would calm them, or at least give them a reason to believe. Patch me through to the cabin, she said. The attendant flipped the intercom switch. Amara cleared her throat and pressed the mic. This is Amara Jones speaking from the cockpit. Some of you may already know, but I want to be honest with all of you. I'm a passenger just like you. I'm a student of aerospace engineering, with simulator and light aircraft experience. Both pilots are currently unconscious, and I've taken control of the aircraft. She paused. I know that may be terrifying to hear. I know I'm not what you expected, but I've trained for emergencies like this in simulation. I'm being guided by expert pilots and controllers on the ground. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to get us home safely. Please stay seated and trust the process. We are approaching Montgomery Regional. The plane remained quiet for several seconds. Then, from somewhere mid-cabin, someone clapped. Then others joined in. It wasn't wild cheering, just a slow, steady rhythm. A quiet vote of confidence. Flight attendants exchanged relieved glances. Even the crying babies seemed to settle for a moment. Inside the cockpit, Amara's eyes watered, but she didn't let herself cry. Not yet. Montgomery Tower to Flight 828. You are cleared for final approach. Runway 10. Winds calm. Surface conditions stable. Emergency crews are standing by. Copy, she said. Cleared for approach. The runway was now just 15 miles out. The wide gray strip shimmered ahead like salvation. Amara, Rhodes said. Time to prep for landing. Flaps to position 1. Begin slowing to 200 knots. She nodded, reaching for the flap lever and watching her instruments. The aircraft responded, with a subtle shift in drag. Gear down? Not yet, Rhodes said. Wait till 5-mile marker. Focus on glide slope. Amara looked at the artificial horizon, lined it up, and steadied her breathing. Her thumb tapped lightly against the side of the yoke. She knew this part well. She had done hundreds of virtual landings. But this wasn't about getting a high score. It was about getting real people back to real lives. Flaps to position 2. Reduced to 160 knots? Came the next instruction. Roger. A faint tremble hit the aircraft again as she descended through 5,500 feet. She could now make out the flashing lights along the runway, the tiny specks of emergency vehicles waiting in silence. Now gear down. She flipped the lever. The mechanical whine echoed under the floor. 3 green lights. Landing gear locked. Landing configuration is set. She told them. The final approach. 4 minutes to impact, either soft or deadly. Listen to me carefully, Rhodes said in her ear. At 50 feet, pull back slightly. Let the main gear touch first, then reverse thrust. You can do this. Roger. Her fingers tightened on the yoke. She rolled the wings level. Passengers gripped their seats. Some prayed. Some cried. But Amara. She stayed steady dot inside her. Mind, everything slowed. The world fell away. There was only the plane, the sky, and the runway rushing to meet them. Amara had never landed anything this big. The biggest she'd ever piloted in real life was a Cessna 172, and even that was under supervision. Now, a twin-engine commercial jet hurtled toward a runway at over 150 knots, in crosswinds, carrying over 160 terrified passengers. She wasn't licensed. She wasn't supposed to be in that seat. But the universe didn't care. The moment had arrived, and it had chosen her. The voice of Captain Rhodes crackled, again through the headset. Calm, precise, 3 miles out. You're right on the glide slope, Amara. Looking good. Begin slight nose-up trim. Maintain 140 knots. Amara adjusted the yoke. The nose rose slightly. The aircraft responded smoothly, almost as if it trusted her now. She double-checked flaps fully extended. Gear 3 green. Airspeed dropping gently. Altitude 3,200 feet. The cockpit was still glowing with red warning lights from earlier. Malfunctions, but the systems she needed were still responding. Just barely dot, the wind gusted hard from the right. The plane rocked sideways, and her stomach flipped. She instinctively countered with a left aileron input, leveling the wings again. Rhodes. Voice returned. That was a pro move. You're doing incredible. But Amara didn't feel incredible. Her hands were slick with sweat. Her jaw ached from how tightly she'd been clenching it. Every breath she took was deliberate, forced. Behind her, the flight crew had secured the cabin. Passengers were instructed to brace. Many were crying now. Some simply stared ahead, gripping the armrests like lifelines. She could feel their fear through the walls of the cockpit. She couldn't let them down. The runway was fully visible now. It loomed ahead, lights flickering, shimmering with heat. And tension. Emergency vehicles lined its edges, fire trucks, ambulances, rescue teams, everyone waiting for impact. Some expecting flames, others praying for a miracle. 2 miles out, Rhodes said. You're a bit fast. Reduce throttle to idle. Let her sink. Amara eased off the throttle. The engine's roar softened. She felt the plane begin to descend. More rapidly, the wind steadied. The aircraft lined up almost perfectly with the center line. Start your flare at 50 feet. Stay calm. You've got this. She nodded, even though no one could see. Her lips pressed together in concentration. Her pulse thundered in her ears. A soft, automated voice called out from the cockpit computer. 500 feet. She steadied the yoke, gently guiding the aircraft into its final glide. The nose was up just slightly. The main landing gear would take the hit first if she did this right. If she didn't, there might be no second chance. 100 feet. She tightened her grip. The runway blurred beneath them. 50, 40, 30, 20. She pulled back gently, just as Rhodes instructed. 10. 5. The plane touched down. The tires screamed against the tarmac. For a terrifying moment, the aircraft bounced, then came down hard again. Sparks flew from the left side. The plane shuddered violently, but it stayed straight. Amara slammed her foot on the brakes and pulled the reverse thrust lever. The engine whined in response. The jet slowed sharply. Passengers were thrown forward in their seats, crying out. Oxygen masks still dangled above them like ghosts. Outside, the emergency teams watched in disbelief. The Boeing 737 rolled to a shaky, smoke-dusted stop in the middle of runway 10. Silence. Then a roar of applause from the back of the aircraft. Came clapping, then cheers. Some cried, some shouted. Some collapsed into the arms of neighbors they hadn't even spoken to when the flight began. But no one could believe it. A girl, just a girl, had landed the plane in the cockpit. Amara's hands were still glued to the controls. Her breathing was rapid, shallow. Her legs trembled. Tears filled her eyes, though she hadn't realized. She was crying. She had done it. She had landed the plane. A flight attendant opened the cockpit door. Amara, her voice cracked. You did it. You really did it. Amara nodded, barely able to speak. Outside, medics boarded. They rushed to the cockpit to check the pilots. EMTs wheeled in oxygen tanks, defibrillators, stretchers. Captain Reeves was still unconscious, but breathing. The co-pilot groaned as responders lifted him. Both were stabilized quickly. Neither had died, thankfully, but it wasn't the pilots who saved the day. It was her. Amara stood up slowly, limbs aching with tension. She stepped out into the aisle, and the passengers who could see her gasped. A girl in a Spellman hoodie. Number. Uniform. No stripes. No wings. But she was the reason they were alive. Someone shouted, "That's her." Then they all rose, those who could, and applauded again. Flight 828 wasn't just a near tragedy. It was a miracle. And Amara Jones was the miracle worker. As she stepped off the plane, still stunned, she was greeted by a wall of flashing cameras, reporters shouting her name, emergency responders standing at attention. The FAA director himself was already en route. She blinked under the lights, lost in the moment. One reporter shoved a microphone forward. "Are you really the passenger who landed the plane?" Amara opened her mouth. Then quietly, she said, "I was never just a passenger." The runway was behind her, but the whirlwind was only beginning. As Amara stood just outside the aircraft, she was quickly surrounded first by medics, then by flight crew, and soon by journalists already on scene. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters pushed microphones forward, bombarding her with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Her face was pale, her hands still shaking. A fire chief offered her a blanket. Paramedic handed her water, but she barely noticed any of it. Her brain was still in that cockpit, replaying every sound, every move, every near miss. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She had just wanted to survive. "Miss Jones," someone said firmly, "we need to move you away from the crowd." It was an FAA officer, his voice crisp, authoritative. "We'll need your full account of what happened, but not here. Come with us." Amara nodded, stunned. She followed the officer away from the chaos toward a private terminal. Behind her, passengers were still being helped off the aircraft, some limping, others in wheelchairs. Families hugged. Strangers cried together. Everyone kept glancing her way. Whispers followed her like shadows. "That's the girl. She landed the plane. She saved us all." In the terminal, the FAA quickly debriefed her, recording every detail she could remember, from the moment the oxygen masks dropped to the final screech of the tires. Amara answered everything honestly, though her voice occasionally cracked. She didn't embellish anything. She didn't need to. The truth was already extraordinary. Meanwhile, in the skies above, the storm she had outrun finally reached Montgomery. Thunder cracked. Lightning lit up the darkening clouds. Rain pelted the roof. Had she been just 15 minutes later, that storm could have made the landing impossible. Everyone agreed. The timing had been razor thin. Her instincts had been perfect. After the interview, they offered to call her parents. She hesitated. She didn't want to scare them, but there was no hiding it now. Her face was already all over the news. She called her mother first. "Hi, Mom." Silence. "Amara? Baby, are you okay?" "What's happening?" "We saw the news your flight. Are you?" "I'm okay. I'm safe. I flew the plane, Mom." There was a beat of stunned silence. Then came the crying. From there, things moved quickly. Within hours, national news outlets had picked up the story. Black student lands passenger jet after pilots collapse mid-air. Hero in the sky. 22-year-old woman guides plane to safety. Videos flooded social media. Passengers uploaded phone footage of the chaotic cabin, the cheers after landing, and interviews praising the calm, focused girl in the HOODIE. Amara Jones began trending. On Twitter. Hashtag passenger pilot. Hashtag she landed it. Hashtag not just a passenger. News anchors couldn't stop replaying the story. Headlines across the country read, "Who is Amara Jones?" Back home in Atlanta, her professors were stunned. Her flight instructor couldn't believe it. She was always sharp, always focused. "But I never thought she'd have to put her training to use like this," he told reporters. Her classmates flooded her phone with messages. "You're a legend. NASA better hire you now. Can we still study together, or are you too famous?" Through it all, Amara stayed grounded. She wasn't chasing a spotlight. She just wanted rest. A hot shower, sleep, and maybe a moment to possess that she had just saved over 160 lives. But rest didn't come easily. By the next morning, she was booked for interviews. The FAA requested a formal report. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, opened an investigation into the incident. Experts confirmed the pilots had suffered a mix of medical trauma and oxygen failure, likely due to a subtle cabin pressure malfunction. The plane's emergency systems had failed to alert fast enough. If Amara hadn't acted, the descent could have turned fatal within minutes. Still, not everyone believed it at first. "She's not a licensed pilot," one anchor pointed out skeptically. "Are we sure this isn't exaggerated?" "She's not even in uniform," another questioned. But facts spoke louder. Radar logs confirmed it. Cockpit audio proved it. Ground control recordings captured every second she spoke with them. There was no denying it now. And one by one, even the skeptics fell silent. The FAA released a statement. Though not certified, Amara Jones's actions demonstrated exceptional airmanship and calm under life-threatening conditions. Her quick thinking, aviation knowledge, and cooperation with ground control prevented a catastrophic disaster. By day 3, she was invited to appear on Good Morning America, CNN, The Today Show, and even The Late Show. She agreed to one interview, local news only, and sat in front of the camera, nervous but composed. "I didn't do it for attention," she said quietly. "I did it because someone had to, and I just knew what to do. That doesn't make me a hero. That makes me prepared." Millions watched. Millions were moved. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when the passengers of Flight 828 gathered themselves. A private Facebook group titled "We Owe Our Lives to Amara" exploded overnight. One mother posted a photo of her child with a sign, "Thank you for bringing my mommy home." Another post showed 150 signatures, every passenger who had survived attached to a framed message. You were never just a passenger. You were our captain when it mattered most." Amara cried when she saw it. The storm had passed. The struggle had ended, but her journey was far from over. By the end of the week, Amara was no longer just a viral story. She had become a symbol. News outlets dubbed her America's passenger pilot, while aviation forums exploded with debates, some celebrating her, others questioning how a civilian was even allowed to take control. But for Amara, the whirlwind had taken an emotional toll. Her phone buzzed constantly. Some messages lifted her spirits, pilots, students, and even military veterans thanking her for her courage. But others were darker. Some criticized her, accusing her of lying, saying it was impossible for a young black woman to land a commercial jet. A few trolls suggested she'd somehow staged the entire thing for fame. Amara had always known being black, female, and brilliant didn't protect her from criticism, but still it hurt. Even now, after saving lives, she had to defend herself. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like turbulence she hadn't anticipated. Her mother noticed the stress immediately. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she reminded her. "You did what you had to do. You saved them. The world saw it." But the noise didn't quiet. Amara returned home to find reporters camping outside her apartment. Her university called an emergency press conference just to address the wave of attention. She skipped it. Her dean understood. "Take time," he said. "You've earned it." She did try to take a step back. For 2 days, she shut off her phone, avoided the news, and sat on the rooftop of her building at night, staring up at the stars. That's what always brought her peace, the sky. It had once seemed so unreachable, but now it felt like home. Then, an envelope arrived. It bore the seal of the Federal Aviation Administration. Amara opened it nervously, bracing for legal jargon or regulatory threats. Instead, it held something unexpected, a formal invitation. The FAA wanted her to speak at their annual Women in Aviation Summit in Washington, D.C. They also wanted to discuss accelerating her pilot certification. Private, commercial, whatever route she wanted to take, they were prepared to help her get there. She couldn't believe it. Less than 2 weeks ago, she was flying coach in seat 24B. Now she was being invited to speak as a national aviation figure. Amara agreed, but only on one condition. "If I speak, I want other black girls in that audience. Bring them in. Let them see this is possible." The FIA said yes. On the day of the summit, Amara stood backstage in a navy blue blazer, her hair in soft braids, palms sweaty. The crowd before her included thousands of women pilots, engineers, mechanics, students, and executives. The air buzzed with excitement. The moderator's voice rang out. "Please welcome the woman who made the impossible possible, Amara Jones." Applause erupted. She stepped forward, swallowed her nerves, and began. "I'm not a hero. I'm not a miracle worker. I was just a passenger who happened to be prepared," she said. "But what I want everyone to know, especially the young girls who look like me, is this: you belong in these skies. In the cockpit, in control, we've been passengers for too long." The crowd stood, cheered, some wept. That single speech launched a new chapter in Amara's life. Soon, she began partnering with aviation outreach programs, visiting high schools, encouraging students, especially girls of color, to pursue STEM and flight training. She met with NASA officials. A scholarship fund was started in her name. The Amara Altitude Scholarship was designed to sponsor future female pilots who couldn't afford lessons. And yet, even amid all the praise, she never let it inflate her. One afternoon, Amara received a call from Captain Rhodes, the air traffic controller who had guided her through the landing. His voice was warm. "You're not just a pilot, Amara. You're a leader. I've worked with trained men who panic under pressure. You kept your head. I hope you never stop flying. Then he paused. There's a plane we'd like you to see. It was an old but preserved Boeing 737, the same model she'd landed. It had been decommissioned, but was being restored for museum display. The airline had decided to name it Amara 1, painted just below the cockpit window, in honor of the girl who believed she could fly, so she did. She was speechless. That night, she returned to her apartment, sat on her rooftop again, and thought back to her childhood, the posters of planes on her bedroom wall, the simulator she saved months to buy, the instructors who underestimated her, the nights she cried after classes where no one took her seriously, and then, that moment, when she sat in a real cockpit, took a deep breath, and flew. Her journey wasn't over, not even close. She had more tests to pass, more training to finish. But now, she had something bigger, a purpose. She wasn't just chasing her dream. She was carving a runway for others to follow. Amara Jones was no longer a name whispered in disbelief. She was a beacon. Proof that sometimes the right person isn't the one in uniform. It's the one who rises when no one else can. And she was only getting started. 3 months had passed since the day Amara Jones made headlines. The news cycle had moved on, but her life hadn't slowed. In fact, it had only accelerated. She was now back in the classroom, diving deep into aviation mechanics and advanced simulations, more focused than ever. But something had changed. People watched her differently now, professors, classmates, even visiting airline executives. Some nodded with respect. Others seemed intimidated. A few questioned whether the attention had made her cocky. But Amara wasn't concerned with anyone's opinion. She didn't have time for pride. She had a license to earn and a higher purpose to fulfill. While still juggling school, Amara trained at a regional airfield in Georgia, logging hours toward her commercial pilot certification. Her instructors marveled at her instincts, often saying, "She doesn't just fly by the book, she feels the machine." Word got around that the FAA had marked her file with a rare designation, High Priority Advancement Candidate. If she passed her tests, she'd be eligible for fast-track training at any national airline. And she planned to dot each morning before sunrise. She ran 2 miles. After class, she hit the airfield. Evenings were for studying, checking weather systems, reviewing safety procedures, and running cockpit simulations. While her peers spent weekends out, she spent hers in the hangar, tightening bolts and asking mechanics about fuel mixtures and wing dynamics. Then, one day, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Jones?" A calm voice sighed. "This is Commander Harris from the United States Air Force. We've been following your story. Would you have time for a meeting?" Amara sat up. Yes, sir. I'd be honored." 2 days later, she was flown to Maxwell Air Force Base. It was surreal walking into a secure military facility, saluted by cadets, escorted past jets lined like soldiers on parade. Commander Harris greeted her with a firm handshake and piercing eyes. "We're building a new training initiative," he explained. "We believe your story is a gateway. We want to show young Americans, especially underrepresented communities, that aviation isn't a locked door." Amara was stunned. They didn't want her just as a pilot. They wanted her as a leader. The initiative was called Project Elevate, civilian to military pipeline program designed to expose high school students to aviation careers early. The Air Force wanted Amara to be the public face of it. "Me?" she asked. "But I'm still in training myself." Commander Harris smiled. "Exactly. You're not some mythic figure in a flight suit. You're real. You're them, just a little further down the runway." That night, back at her hotel, Amara stared out the window at the flight line. Jets roared in the distance. She could almost feel their vibrations in her chest. She made her decision. She would lead Project Elevate. Over the next month. She flew across the country, visiting schools in Detroit, Baltimore, Oakland, and Houston, cities where kids often heard more about crime than careers. She brought cockpit mock-ups into classrooms, helped teens run flight sims, and hosted open Q&A sessions. One student asked, "Aren't you scared?" She nodded, terrified. But fear is part of flying. You just don't let it land first. Another girl, about 15, pulled her aside after a session in Chicago and whispered, "I didn't think girls like us could even be pilots." Amara knelt and took her hand. "Now you know we can." Meanwhile, airlines had started competing for her. Delta offered her a mentorship. Southwest wanted her to visit headquarters. One recruiter even said, "We'll put you in a captain's seat within a year, guaranteed." Amara didn't take any offers yet. She wasn't done learning. She wanted to earn it. She wasn't going to be someone who coasted off one miraculous moment. That landing was only her beginning. Still, she kept progressing, clocking air hours, acing exams, building a reputation. But challenges still loomed. During a routine training flight, her instructor abruptly cut the engine mid-air, a common drill. But one Amara hadn't yet faced alone. For a second, her old fear gripped her. The ground loomed large below. She had seconds to react, but then she remembered the descent. The sickening dive over Alabama, the empty seat beside her, the screams, the silence, and the voice from air traffic control telling her, "You're in command now." Her hands moved instinctively. Rudder, flaps, wind correction, altitude balance. She restarted the engine at 1,800 feet and leveled off perfectly. When they landed, her instructor didn't say a word. He just gave her a look, pride mixed with awe. She passed the test. Her certification followed 2 weeks later. She was now, officially, a licensed commercial pilot. The news didn't go viral this time, but that was okay. This moment wasn't for the world. It was for her. She stood on the airfield, alone, staring up at the sky with her certificate in hand. She had come so far from the back row of an economy seat to the front seat of her own destiny, and she wasn't flying solo anymore. Dozens of students she'd met had now enrolled in aviation academies. Some of the girls she mentored had started their own online group called the Amara Flyers, sharing flight tips, applications, and encouragement. She never asked them to name it after her. But when she found out, she cried. She had wanted to reach the sky, but now she was lifting others with her. 1 year after that fateful flight, Amara Jones stood on the tarmac of JFK International Airport, dressed in full uniform. Her nameplate glinted under the morning sun, Captain A. Jones. The moment felt surreal, even after all she'd achieved. But this wasn't a simulation. This was real. She was about to pilot her first official commercial flight. Behind her, the crew prepared the cabin. Passengers boarded slowly, rolling luggage and cradling coffee cups. None of them knew the full story of the woman at the controls. To them, she was just another captain, professional, calm, confident. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Amara had trained relentlessly. She had passed every test, survived every drill, faced doubt, and stood firm in storms, both literal and personal. This wasn't about proving she could do it anymore. It was about doing it every day, for the rest of her life. Not as a miracle, but as a master of her craft. As boarding completed, the co-pilot looked at her and smiled. "Ready to fly, Captain?" She nodded. "Let's take them home." As the engines roared to life, she thought back to everything that led here. The impossible descent, the deathly quiet in the cockpit, the feel of the yoke in her trembling hands, the voice in her headset saying, "You're in command now." Back then, she hadn't believed it, but now, she lived it. Takeoff was smooth. As the plane climbed over New York City, a streak of sun lit the skyline below. In that moment, Amara felt like the entire world stretched out before her limitless. Hers. Her story hadn't just changed her life. It had rippled outward. A documentary had premiered on Netflix, The Passenger Pilot, the Amara Jones story. Interviews with survivors, footage from the cockpit camera, and her own narration had captured hearts worldwide. People wrote letters, thanking her for reminding them what human courage looked like. She'd been honored at the White House by the president, who awarded her the Medal of Civilian Bravery, a rare recognition reserved for citizens whose actions saved lives at great personal risk. "Miss Jones," the president said, "you didn't just land a plane, you lifted a nation." She hadn't cried then, but she cried later, alone, in her hotel room, clutching the medal, whispering to herself, "This is real. You did it." And still, she didn't slow down. Amara launched a nonprofit, Flight for All, an organization providing free aviation programs to underprivileged teens across America. She fundraised millions, built partnerships with major airlines, and established 10 regional training hubs by the end of the year. Some people called her the Rosa Parks of the runway. Others compared her to the Wright brothers. But she never wanted comparisons. "I'm not here to be the next someone," she told interviewers. "I'm here to be the first me." At an air show in Texas, she reunited with Captain Rhodes, the air traffic controller who talked her down during the emergency. "I knew you were different that day," he said, tears in his eyes. "I just didn't know how much." They hugged like family. Later that year, she was invited to give a TED Talk. She stepped onto the red circle, looked into the camera, and said, "The scariest part of flying isn't turbulence. It's doubt. People will tell you you're not ready, that you don't belong. But the truth is, sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just hands you the controls and says, 'Fly.'" That quote went viral. It was printed on T-shirts, painted on classroom walls, framed in aviation academies. But through all of it, Amara stayed grounded. Every week, she returned to her old high school in Atlanta, visiting her old science teacher. Mrs. Dorsey, who now ran the school's first aviation club, started in Amara's honor. Students lined up to ask questions, take selfies, share dreams. One boy asked her, "What's the scariest thing you ever did?" Amara smiled. "Not landing the plane. Believing I was allowed to try." And what a flight it had been. Her 3,000th flight hour came 6 months later. She marked it by flying her mother, who had never flown before, on a short charter from Atlanta to Charlotte. Her mom clutched her hand during takeoff, eyes wide with wonder. "I always knew you'd fly," she whispered. Later that evening, as they stood watching the stars outside their family home, Amara said, "Remember that girl who used to stare at the sky from our roof?" Her mom smiled. "She's still up there." And she was. Now, she had a whole generation behind her girls, who looked up and saw possibility, not impossibility. Boys who saw pilots, not just uniforms. People who believed in second chances, in miracles, in preparation meeting purpose. On the anniversary of her emergency landing, the FIA hosted a ceremony to commemorate the lives she saved. Survivors of that flight hugged her with tears in their eyes. One of them, a former surgeon, had written a book about the experience. He took the mic and said, "Most people fear death at 35,000 feet. But that day, I met someone who reminded us how powerful life is even in freefall." He handed Amara a small gift box. Inside was a replica cockpit yoke, engraved with the words, "You took the controls and gave us hope." That night, Amara stood alone once more, under the stars. The sky was still vast, still calling, but she no longer stared with longing. She stared with gratitude. Because now, She didn't dream of flying Dot. She lived it Dot every single day.